Welcome to the first part in the lecture series, The Fine Art Poster. The years that we'll be looking at is from roughly around 1860 to 1914. And during this time, a new form of advertising, which was also a new form of art, the illustrated colour advertising poster, emerged. Or we sometimes call it the fine art poster. So this first image here, these first two images, the one on the left is an image of a Parisian street from the early 1900s. And although this image is black and white, if you imagine all of the side of the building, these are all posters stuck to the side of the building. Imagine these in beautiful, bright colours. Here's a picture on the right of a Parisian street from 1920, or they were 1920, so we're roughly 20 years on from this first image. And you can even see roughly 20 years on, the quality of the photography had much improved. But not only that, the posters, the standard of the prints that they could use had improved. So you can see this is a little bit more like, it's not that dissimilar to a street that you would see anywhere in Europe nowadays. So during that time period, people described the streets of Paris as looking like outdoor art galleries. And it was a time period where famous fine artists of the day, their work was suddenly cast into the public domain. So people that didn't know who Cheret or Alphonse Mucha or Toulouse-Lautrec were, suddenly they knew their work because it was all over the streets of Paris. During this time, the Industrial Revolution, it was well underway. It had happened, and there was this new transition of changing the manufacturing processes in Europe and the United States. So the Industrial Revolution happened from roughly 1760 to in and around 1840. So by the time the fine art poster arrived, the Industrial Revolution had changed society utterly. This also led to an unprecedented rise in the rate of population growth. So with this, the age of the consumer had arrived. And with this shift in society, some of the first forms of advertising emerged, and mostly these fine art posters. So these posters were an ideal way to educate consumers, not always about what to buy, almost what they should buy. And it led the way to this modern form of advertising that we're all used to. So during this time, posters for alcoholic beverages provided a good example of art leading the way to break a taboo. So previous fine art poster depictions of pretty women enjoying themselves, like in these two posters, women drinking alcohol, this just didn't exist before the fine art poster arrived. So previous to the fine art poster, alcohol was normally depicted in three different ways. This first image here, which is a Velázquez poster, it's called The Triumph of Bacchus. This shows Bacchus here, basically helping these poor Spanish peasants out of their sorrow by giving them alcohol. It's quite, although it might seem like a happy scene, it's quite a sad one actually, because these peasants, they have such miserable, poor lives that the only thing that will help them is alcohol. This second painting from Picasso from 1901, this one here, the lady in the blue outfit, this is called The Absinthe Drinker. And again, it might just seem like a lady sitting on her own drinking absinthe, but it's quite a sad one. This image of the solitary figure, the lonely figure, depressed on their own, drinking and drowning their sorrows. The third style where you would have seen alcohol is, this, for example, this Cézanne, Still Life with Peppermint. It's beautifully painted, but there's no moralistic story here. So these were the three ways that alcohol was depicted before the fine art poster came along. The other thing that happened during this time was not only did the depiction of women drinking alcohol, which was something new, but a lot of new brands emerged. So on the left here, we have a poster for a bicycle company, a British bicycle company. And on the right here, this is by Alphonse Mucha, and the one on the right is by Toulouse-Lautrec for a brand of confetti. So people all of a sudden started to recognize brands because they saw them in these posters. Another thing that happened was the star was born. So previous to the fine art poster, images of famous people on posters were just not a thing. It's pretty standard nowadays. This poster is by Alphonse Mucha, and it shows a famous actress called Sarah Bernhardt. This is a famous cabaret singer at the time, which his name was Aristide Bruant. And he was always depicted by Toulouse-Lautrec in this type of clothing with the red scarf and the hat and the dark coat. And this kind of image he became famous for through Toulouse-Lautrec. This is another Lautrec, it's Jane Avril, and we'll see more images of her as we go through the lecture series. But this is Jane Avril checking a print that Lautrec has done of her. So these people didn't know what they looked like. Remember, photography was in its infancy, so people didn't know what they looked like until these posters came along, and suddenly the star was born. Previous to these beautiful, bright fine art posters looked like this, black and white with type all over them. At that time, the typesetter, the person laying out these letters, was the designer and typesetter all in one. There was generally no imagery on the posters. They were printed only in black and white, and they tried to fill all of the space with type. The problem with this was, well, twofold. First of all, there's so much type on these posters, it's hard to tell what they're even advertising. And second of all, you're talking about a time when not everybody was literate, not everybody could read. So having a poster like this wasn't really much use. A fine art poster, even if you couldn't read, you could get something from it. So lithography is the process, letterpress printing, which these were, old kind of Victorian posters were full of letter forms, were done using letterpress. So these two images show letterpress printing. This is a tray with all of the letters in it, and a typesetter would set all of the letters and lay them on a sort of a flatbed printer like this, and the page would be brought over and the poster would be printed. This is a photograph of a print room at the time. So all of these rows of men would have been setting type. So essentially this room of men is what we now know as a keyboard on a computer. But before the time of computers, this is how it would have worked. Until 1798, when Alois Sennenfelder, which this is a lithograph of Alois Sennenfelder, until he came along. So he was a German and he invented lithography. Lithography comes from two words, lithos and graphy, lithos meaning stone and graphy meaning to draw. So essentially what he invented was you would get a sheet of this Bavarian lime, or a slab of Bavarian limestone, and you would draw directly onto it with special wax crayons or pencils. The ink would adhere basically to the waxy parts and would be repelled by the non-waxy parts. So this is a piece of stone with a map drawn on it, and this is the print on paper of that map. So it gave an artist a lot of freedom to be able to, certainly fine artists loved it because they could draw directly onto the plate and then print. So the next person that we're going to look at is the father of the poster, a man called Jules Chéret.